Imagine for a moment that the country you love, the country you were born in, suddenly turns its back on you. The government declares you a threat, your neighbors view you with suspicion, and your family is forced out of their home, herded onto trains, and locked behind barbed wire in desolate camps. You are stripped of your rights, your property, and your dignity, simply because of the blood that runs in your veins. Now, ask yourself, if that same government suddenly asked you to put on a uniform, travel across the world, and fight for the very freedom that had been stolen from you, what would you do? For thousands of young Japanese American men during World War II, the answer was a resounding, defiant yes. This is the story of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a unit composed entirely of Japanese Americans who adopted the gambler's motto, "Go for broke." They wagered everything, their lives, their limbs, and their futures to prove their loyalty to a nation that had betrayed them. By the end of the war, they would become the most decorated unit of its size and length of service in the history of the United States military. And their defining moment would come in a dark, freezing forest in France, where they were sent to achieve the impossible. The story begins on a quiet Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese Navy plunged the United States into a global war and ignited a firestorm of panic and paranoia on the home front. Almost overnight, Japanese Americans, most of whom were Nisei, second-generation citizens born on American soil, became the targets of intense racial hysteria. Politicians, newspapers, and military leaders stoked the flames of fear, claiming that anyone of Japanese descent was a potential spy or saboteur. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, a devastating decree that authorized the forced relocation and incarceration of over 120,000 men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry. Families were given only a few days to sell their homes, businesses, and belongings for pennies on the dollar. They were packed into trains with the blinds drawn and transported to remote, harsh environments, deserts in Arizona, desolate plains in Wyoming, and swamps in Arkansas. They lived in hastily constructed tar paper barracks, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards in watchtowers, whose machine guns pointed inward, at them rather than outward. Despite this profound injustice, when the U.S. government, desperate for manpower, reversed its policy in 1943 and allowed Japanese Americans to volunteer for combat, the response was overwhelming. In Hawaii, where mass internment had not occurred due to economic necessity, thousands of young men rushed to recruiting stations. On the mainland, the scene was even more heartbreaking and surreal. Young men stood up from the dust of the internment camps, said goodbye to their parents who were still being held as prisoners of their own country, and swore an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. They were sent to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, for training. Initially, there was intense friction between the Hawaiian Japanese, known as Buddha heads, and the mainland Japanese, known as Kotonks. The Hawaiians, accustomed to an integrated society, found the mainlanders aloof and sullen. The mainlanders, carrying the deep trauma of the internment camps, viewed the Hawaiians as carefree and ignorant of true suffering. But a turning point arrived when the Hawaiian soldiers visited the nearby Rower and Jerome internment camps in Arkansas. Seeing the barbed wire, the armed guards, and the bleak conditions their fellow soldiers' families were enduring, the Hawaiians were profoundly moved. The rivalry dissolved into a fierce, unbreakable brotherhood. They were no longer islanders or mainlanders. They were the 442nd. Their combat journey began in the rugged, mountainous terrain of Italy. The 100th Infantry Battalion, a predecessor unit composed mostly of Hawaiian Nisei, had already been fighting fiercely and taking such heavy casualties that they earned the grim nickname, the Purple Heart Battalion. When the rest of the 442nd arrived, they seamlessly integrated into the line. They fought their way up the Italian boot through Monte Cassino, Anzio, and Rome, driving the German army back town by town. They became famous for their aggressive tactics, refusing to retreat even under withering fire. Local Italians were often bewildered, but overjoyed to be liberated by Asian men wearing American uniforms. The Nisei soldiers were not just fighting the Nazis. They were fighting a war on two fronts. Every bunker they cleared, every hill they took, was a statement to the politicians and the bigots back home. They fought with a visceral fury, knowing that any failure on the battlefield would be blamed not on their tactics, but on their race. In October 1944, the 442nd was pulled from the relatively sunny, familiar battlefields of Italy and thrust into a completely different kind of hell. They were transferred to eastern France, to the Vosges Mountains. The Vosges were a nightmare of geography and weather. It was a region of steep, jagged hills covered in ancient and possibly dense pine forests. The canopy was so thick that daylight barely penetrated to the forest floor. A freezing, relentless rain turned the ground into a soup of mud and ice. The German forces had heavily fortified the mountains, knowing that no army in history had ever successfully fought its way through the Vosges in winter. The 442nd was immediately thrown into brutal combat to capture the towns of Bruyères and Befontaine, engaging in terrifying house-to-house and tree-to-tree fighting. They succeeded, but they were exhausted, battered, and suffering from trench foot and hypothermia. They desperately needed rest. But the war had other plans. Just miles away, disaster had struck. The 1st Battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment, a unit originally composed of the Texas National Guard, had pushed too aggressively into the dense forest pursuing retreating Germans. The trap closed behind them. 275 Texans were completely surrounded, cut off from their supply lines, their commanders, and any hope of retreat. They became known as the Lost Battalion. For days, the trapped men dug into the freezing mud as German artillery pounded their positions. They ran out of food, medical supplies, and ammunition. They resorted to drinking muddy water from puddles. American commanders, specifically Major General John Dahlquist, panicked. Losing an entire battalion would be a catastrophic blow to morale and a major tactical failure. Dahlquist ordered unit after unit into the meat grinder of the Vosges forest to break the encirclement and rescue the Texans. Every single attempt was repelled by the entrenched Germans, resulting in heavy American casualties. Running out of options, General Dahlquist turned to the 442nd, even though the Nisei soldiers had just come off the line and were decimated from their previous battles. The order was given: rescue the lost battalion at any cost. The men of the 442nd packed their gear, fixed their bayonets, and marched into the freezing dark woods. What followed was 5 days of some of the most savage, close-quarters combat of World War II. The Germans had the high ground and heavily fortified machine gun nests. The Nisei fought inch by agonizing inch up the steep ridges. The most terrifying weapon they faced was the tree burst. German artillery shells were timed to explode in the upper canopy of the towering pine trees, raining thousands of lethal, razor-sharp wooden splinters and jagged metal shrapnel down onto the unprotected Americans below. Men were dying at a staggering rate. The mud was stained red. Yet they did not stop. When one man fell, another stepped forward to take his place. By October 29th, the situation had reached a boiling point. Companies I and K of the 442nd found themselves pinned down by a massive network of German machine guns at the top of a steep ridge. The fire was so intense that they couldn't even raise their heads. Ammunition was practically gone. The situation was mathematically hopeless. But the Nisei soldiers, driven by absolute desperation and an unwavering commitment to their brothers in the trapped battalion, did the unthinkable. Without a coordinated order, without a grand strategy, the men of I and K companies spontaneously rose from the mud. They fixed their bayonets, let out a terrifying guttural battle cry, and charged directly into the teeth of the German machine guns. It was an American banzai charge. The sheer, shocking audacity of seeing these men running straight upward through a hail of bullets shattered the German resolve. The defenders hesitated, then broke. Hand-to-hand combat ensued in the trenches, a brutal, chaotic melee of rifle butts, bayonets, and bare hands. The 442nd tore through the final German defenses, shattering the encirclement once and for all. When the soldiers of the 442nd finally broke through into the perimeter of the lost battalion, the scene was one of overwhelming emotion. The exhausted, starving, heavily bearded Texans wept openly, hugging the battered Japanese-American soldiers who had walked through hell to save them. But the cost of that salvation was astronomically high, a devastating mathematical equation that highlighted the tragedy of war. To rescue 211 surviving members of the Texas Battalion, the 442nd suffered over 800 casualties. Company I had entered the Vastas Forest with 185 men. When they walked out, only 8 were left standing. Company K had been reduced from 186 men to a mere 17. Entire squads had been wiped from existence. They had literally gone for broke, giving everything they had to save men they did not even know. A few days later, General Dahlquist ordered the 442nd to assemble for a formal review to commend them for their actions. The surviving men, shivering in their muddy, blood-stained uniforms, lined up on a field. When Dahlquist arrived, he looked at the sparse, thin ranks and became visibly angry. He turned to the commanding officer, Colonel Charles Pence, and sharply reprimanded him. "I ordered you to have the entire regiment stand in formation," Dahlquist barked. Colonel Pence, with tears in his eyes, looked at the general and replied, "Sir, this is the entire regiment. That's all that's left." The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy, tragic testament to the sacrifice the unit had just made. When the war finally ended, the men of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team returned to a country that was forever changed by their blood. They had earned over 18,000 individual decorations, including 9,486 Purple Hearts and 21 Medals of Honor. In 1946, President Harry Truman stood in the pouring rain on the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. to review the 442nd and attach the Presidential Unit citation to their regimental colors. Looking out at the men who had fought fascism abroad while their families were locked in cages at home, Truman spoke words that would echo through history. "You fought not only the enemy," the president said, "but you fought prejudice, and you have won. Keep up that fight, and we will continue to win to make this great republic stand for just what the Constitution says it stands for: the welfare of all the people all the time." The story of the 442nd is not just a military victory. It is one of the most profound lessons in American history. It is a reminder that patriotism is not defined by race, by ancestry, or by how a country treats you in its darkest hour. Patriotism is defined by the ideals you are willing to die for, and the men of the 442nd proved that sometimes the greatest heroes of a nation are the very people that nation tried to discard.